forces impacting the future of legal ops. Greg, can you give an introduction to yourself?
Yeah, sure. Great to be here, Colin. Thanks for having me. I started my career at PwC in New York City with what would be called e-discovery today. Spent some time entrepreneuring in the legal healthcare and higher ed space before joining Kaiser 6.5 years ago to help start up their outside counsel management. But in the process, we've turned around the finance, stabilized the technology, and are in the process of transforming the staffing and legal operations today.
Thanks for the introduction, Greg. So we're going to dive into the meat of it, and we're going to make it exciting this morning. We're going to make it quick and impactful, and we're going to discuss the 4 forces that are currently impacting the future of legal operations. Starting with the first one, and I'm going to preface it before I jump into some rapid-fire questions that we're going to run through with Greg. So the first one is the doing more with less challenge. So legal departments are not first in line when budgets are allocated, yet the work they do to protect the brand and assets of the organization is vital to its success. So first question, Greg, what are some of the factors that are driving increased workloads for legal teams?
Well, we got this little virus running around the globe called COVID. And as a healthcare organization, that's probably the number one thing driving us. Our medical staff, our hospital operations are all deeply impacted with COVID. Kaiser, being a healthcare provider, is a heavily regulated organization where almost nothing happens without a lawyer being involved to begin with, much less this kind of new, novel, actual kind of health treatment. As a result of COVID, we've had to stand up brand new hospitals from scratch in order to handle surge. We've had to change the way we're doing business from not just social distancing and masks, but increasing telehealth work. And guess what? Medicare and Medicaid, they don't typically pay for telehealth visits. So all of a sudden, our in-person visits that were driving some kind of revenue are now going to virtual, which could be better for the patient, but also are going to have some financial impacts. And so legal is deeply involved with all aspects of the healthcare business, whether it's the delivery at the hospital side or it's the revenue collection from Medicare and Medicaid, or it's looking at new products and new business acquisitions or development that we're trying to do.
Yeah.
Most of this is either in response to the healthcare threat of COVID or the indirect financial threat that COVID has caused. Because as we see, we're not just experiencing a recession, but we're seeing the kinds of companies that buy our more profitable commercial coverage laying their employees off. And so we're losing those employees and revenue streams at the same time those employees are joining Medicaid. Yeah. And that's a product line that we traditionally lose money on. So the kind of forces that we're facing right now to do more with less are kind of extraordinary, even in the grand scheme of previous recessions.
I'm going to keep this a little conversational, just so we can move through the cycle of questions, right? So,
yeah,
is legal pushed more than other business functions around the organization than they have so in the past? To do less with more.
Yeah, I mean, so our general counsel has always said that legal should be a leader within the enterprise. And so we've been, aggressively working to do more with less for the whole 6.5 years I've been here. But if it's possible, we're doing even more with even less. And partly because not just our general counsel pushing us, but now because the enterprise is pushing us. So we've had hiring freezes that have led to kind of indirect ways of reducing headcount by basically taking away the unfilled positions. We've had discretionary spend, quote unquote discretionary spend, meaning outside counsel spend reduction targets, 10% or more. And of course, while all these reductions in headcount and spend are being done, there's the previously mentioned increase in demand and volume. And so do more with less is definitely the theme. I think at some point, though, there's a physics equation that says there's only so much you can do with what you have. And so part of the question that we're faced with is what do we do and what do we not do, and how do we be selective about what gets the best impact for the enterprise?
And that tees up my next question. Like, what are some of the processes within the legal department that you have found to be inherently inefficient and ripe for optimization?
Oh man, the number one process is intake, Colin. My general counsel runs a $150 million a year operating business with $1.8 billion in legal reserves. And honestly, we couldn't tell you how much steel, rubber, and electronics we bring in and how many cars we produce. And it needs to start with intake. And so intake, whether it just be measuring it better in our department once it's gotten to our doorstep and knowing how many new things came in and how many things got done and whether or not we have more work on our plate or less work on our plate, that's a key thing. But some of the challenges intake with clients. Clients often look, especially in healthcare and legal, for the legal department to be almost an implicit PMO for the enterprise. As I said, most things don't happen until a lawyer gets involved. And so lawyers not being the best salespeople or service center people don't inherently understand how to do intake, how to prioritize, how to push back. They know how to say, I love my client, I say yes to my client all the time. Well, Colin, if you've ever met a successful salesperson or business that says yes to their client all the time, I got a bridge for you in Brooklyn that I could sell you. So intake is our number one challenge, both culturally from an account management with our clients, but also technically from a how do we keep track of what's actually happening and know what we're trying to do to respond to it.
This is great, Greg. Moving on to technology, which technologies have provided the most efficiency lift to your teams?
Probably today, Teams. Whether we like Microsoft Teams or not, there's no way you can get around the fact that we live on it. And it made for a COVID virtual environment to be pretty seamless. It's interesting that my kids are going to school on Zoom and probably still have better competency on some of the tools than maybe even myself. But that is, right now we wouldn't be able to operate or survive if we didn't have Teams. But thinking more to the legal tools kind of perspective, we were fortunate that we were making big investments before this challenge happened. And so we got our matter management e-billing tool in place. And now we're beginning to be able to optimize the use of it for process management and for data and analytics. And that was the primary thing I said to our general counsel 6.5 years ago. If you really want to reduce cost, control spend, it's going to be about getting good data and information to make decisions on. And thankfully, with the advent of putting our Team Connect system in place 2 years ago, we're at the place now where we're starting to see some of that data, see some of those more advanced reports that can really help us when we're trying to determine business cases for funding or decisions about managing litigation. And I expect, even though there's needs for other technology, we just recently installed our new legal hold system. We're upgrading our e-document system. All these things ultimately are going to give us the best bang for the buck when they start providing us with data and analytics about what documents matter or what knowledge matters. And so for us in the future, it's all about putting technology in place that, maybe automates processes or creates new kinds of transactions, but ultimately provides us with data analytics to advance our cause.
Okay, and then the last question on the doing more with less challenge. Has the way you staff the legal department changed over time? I.e. more in-house counsel, more legal ops, more specialized? And what has your approach been?
It hasn't changed enough over time, Colin. And that's one of the challenges for legal and legal departments is that the subject matter itself is based on tradition and keeping the law from changing. And so there's something about that that's going to seep into the people who are lawyers and are running the department. And really, in this day and age, a professional services group needs to be agile. It needs to be able to change on a dime, whether it's increasing the amount of internal resources or decreasing them and using outsourcing. And the challenge is to make those decisions and execute them effectively. You have to have a good understanding of what you have, and you have to have good management in place. And I would dare say management, MGMT, is the four-letter word in the legal industry, because until we begin to get lawyers trained as managers or leveraging professional managers, the ability to make changes is always going to be slow. and usually after the fact. So in a lot of ways, Colin, our staffing and our outside spend has stayed very similar or standard. But what has changed is more investment in technology, automation, trying to get those models the way they are to work more efficiently.
Perfect. Greg, a good way to kind of finish up the doing more but less challenge. We're moving on to the next one, which is new market entrants and ALSPs. Just going to preface it before I jump into questions. Over the past few years, we've seen in the use of alternative legal service providers grow in certain high volume or low complexity areas, such as invoice review and portions of contract management. In 2020, we are already seeing the big four professional service networks, such as Deloitte and EY, enter the market with managed services offerings for the legal industry. First question, does your team use ALSPs today? And if so,
we do.
What are some of the advantages?
Yeah, so we do. I would say we don't use the most alternative of alternative service providers. We work with Epic for e-discovery and some document review. We work with different kinds of legal service experts like FTI or BRG. We work with groups like Elevate for support on legal operations. So in this regard, they are alternative legal service providers, but we aren't in the place yet where I think we're using the kind of services from a Deloitte or an Eversheds or Bordawa or some of these groups that are really more alternative, meaning not really even using the kind of old model of lawyers, but using different kinds of tech or professional services to do it. And that has to do a bit with that cultural change and openness. I expect we will increasingly make use of all kinds of alternative service providers once we kind of have more of our internal house in shape to make good use of them.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, like the advantages and disadvantages that you've kind of found with the outsourcing. Can you just kind of maybe list a few?
Yeah, I think the advantages are that you have a company that's providing you service, not a person. And now most attorneys would actually take umbrage with me and say they hire attorneys, not firms, but I think that's a mistake. I hire AT&T to provide my cell phone service. I don't hire Pony Express to run my message across the country. And so I think the biggest thing about the advantage of alternative service providers is you're actually getting a service, not a person. And in the long term, for scalability and complexity and technology, you need a total solution from a provider who understands that fielding 4 or 5 people is like fielding a baseball team. And while a pitcher may carry the team, it's the whole team that wins the game. It's not just one individual. So that then gives rise to some cost benefits, some tech benefits. But oftentimes it can be thwarted by the kind of lack of knowledge that internal attorneys have about how to work with providers, about how to focus on services, because most of them are busy and pulled in directions where they just want the bottle of toothpaste to show up on the shelf and work. And unfortunately, legal is not a manufactured product. It's a co-created product. So I think the big challenge, whether you're an alternative service provider or a law firm or an inside counsel, is whether or not you know how to take those practical steps to work effectively together. If you do, you can make a law firm work pretty damn good. And if you don't, you can make an alternative service provider work pretty damn bad.
So follow up on how do you think managed service offerings will change the entrance of the big four into the legal industry?
I think that they'll be enamored with the shiny thing for a year or two. They won't make enough money on it, and it'll be paid too difficult, and they'll get back out of it just like they've done in the past. Just like every kind of glacial movement, it's going to move some of the topsoil, right? But I don't anticipate historically or given the people personality profit appetite of those leaders in those organizations to actually be able to stick this out for the long run. And I would expect in about 2 years, you're going to see the different groups spin their groups out, and you're going to have new FTIs, and you're going to have new Elevate services, nicely incubated and baked by Deloitte or PwC or whomever. But That would just be my bold conjecture, Colin.
Okay, moving on. The final question on this topic, right? How do you ensure the quality of work that is performed for you outside of the legal department?
Oh, management. It's that four-letter word. There's no way to get around it. Attorneys wish they could create a perfect agreement and they would just create all the incentives, but it's not true. It's all about trust and verify. And so I ensure it by having monthly portfolio meetings with our internal attorneys and at least quarterly meetings with our top outside counsel. And on big matters like our M&A, I personally meet with our M&A counsel on a weekly basis and basically run a project management office where we're watching both the quality of the work, the cost of the work, and the diversity of the work.
Perfect. So that finishes up the second force, new market entrants and ALSPs. We're gonna move on to the next one. Is the first we identified a problem: people, process, technology. And just to preface it, technology growth in the legal operations space has shown incredible momentum over the past few years. Products like workflow automation that enhance collaboration between legal teams and the business users they serve are changing the way we think about legal services. Legal analytics, artificial intelligence, benchmarking, and other innovations will impact the way we do business in years to come. So first question, can you just briefly tell me what you think what I just said means?
Say it again for me, Colin, because I was getting a little
I give you a lot of information and said you summarize it briefly.
Yeah, hit me again with that.
So to summarize it, technology growth in the legal operations space has just blown up in the past few years. We've seen a lot of workflow automation tools like TAP, to help enhance collaboration between legal teams and the business users. Using a lot of what if then now logic to get things done, right? So we can automate it instead of having manual touches. But we're seeing the impact on legal services, legal analytics, and artificial intelligence, right, and benchmarking cases.
Yeah.
So, what are your thoughts and how it's going to impact the legal business in years to come?
Oh, I got it. So let me throw you a thought that nobody's considered yet. It's going to make it a lot worse. And you know why? Because when you automate a bad process, you scale all the problems it creates exponentially. And here's the challenge. We don't have enough lawyers or operations people trained or collaborating on how to build good process. And so right now, I think a lot of these workflow automations put a lot of the cart ahead of the horse because they set expectations with an audience that they're somehow going to magically solve things. And more than likely, what you see is people doing technology process people, not people process technology. And that's where we're really waging the war internally at Kaiser to win the hearts and minds that people have to come first. And then you create a manual process with those people. Oh my God, Colin, did I just say that? I did. I actually said that we consolidate and create manual processes and we make people work harder and longer than we all would like to. Oh, I bet nobody else does this, though. I bet we're all by ourselves, right? But the thing is, once we've created a manual process, I know. Once we've created the manual process that's got somebody there till 8 o'clock at night, you know what happens, Colin? They get a lot of incentive to improve that process. And so then we semi-automate it, spreadsheets, legal or SharePoint, right? And then guess what? Once they've semi-automated it and made the process very good, then they don't want to do it anymore. And so then we automate it with technology. It's a pretty interesting little evolution of how it happens. But when it's done that way, you actually make progress very quickly. And that's what we're working on.
So you're saying as a last resort, adopt technology only as a
I'm not saying as a last resort. I'm saying at the right time to automate something. It's not a last resort, although it often is a third step in the process. But it is certainly not the first resort, and it's certainly not the silver bullet to solve the problem.
But But see, like if you put it into technology, and I will just like be devil's advocate here. If you automate a process that you can measure, when you're scaling, you don't lose that manual. So let's say I'm a person working on a project.
I'm completely with you. And so what I'm saying is, if you walked into my shop right now and said, I'm going to automate settlements, I would be one of the biggest advocates for the amount of time, energy, accuracy, and value that automation would kill. But I would also tell you that I have 10 different people doing settlements right now, and nobody knows how they're doing it consistently in one way. And if I get everybody together for a 6-month project to figure out how to automate it, I'll build a Rube Goldberg machine that'll never work. And so instead, I'm going to consolidate those settlements to 2 people and have them manually figure out how to deal with it. Then we're going to help them automate it, improve it, and then we'll really put it into the long-term kind of process that makes it sustainable if they were to have to leave.
Yeah, I think we are definitely on the same page with that one.
Yeah.
What
by illustration, when we installed our matter management system, everybody got together to say we're going to make the most perfect process in the system. And everybody wanted everything in the world, and nobody accepted anything. And Rube Goldberg went in, and 2 years later, we're cleaning it up and making it work.
That gets me to my next question. Like, what are some of the best candidates within the legal department to start adopting like technology and process automation?
Say that again. It cut in and out a little bit.
So, what are some of the best candidates like within the legal department to that are adopters of technology? Is there any specific groups that are kind of more inclined to technology than others?
Yeah, the legal operations group.
Yeah.
So, the proverbial rolls downhill. So we're the ones working late at night on boring processes. Getting heads cut, and we want more resource. So, but it really depends. It depends on the personality of individuals. So we have certain litigators or health and regulatory attorneys who come from a background of process and technology, and they're easy adopters and they're driving change. We have groups who have functions that are more apt to lend themselves to technology. So whether they be business contracting groups or labor dispute groups. So we really don't have one place where there's like the easy early adopters. And that's kind of what makes it difficult, right? You can't just pick one place and then scale it out. You really have to find each pocket and start to have more of a distributed agile approach to crowdsourcing improvements. And, that's a complex culture to get to.
Yeah. So what's your experience in using out of the box versus customized technology solutions?
Oh, well, I think you absolutely have to use out of the box, and you have to be very reserved about customizing it. The idea that especially in-house legal has any kind of capacity or resource to invent their own stuff is just farcical. I mean, even inventing it within a SharePoint environment, within 2 years, it becomes an unsustainable environment to maintain. So it's essential that you use out of the box. I would actually go further and say it's essential for legal to put first priority to using existing enterprise tools. Legal has to stop creating an exceptionalism story and going and buying brand new tools that are just for legal. Legal should be leveraging off of ServiceNow, should be leveraging off of SharePoint, should be leveraging off of Teams, and customizing or configuring, I should say, not even customizing, configuring it for legal. Every time we go out and buy a new document management system and a new matter management system, we put ourselves in the business of IT, and that's not what lawyers are for. So first and foremost, as my buddy Vince at Shell said, is use what you got internally. And then if you got to get something external, make sure it's going to really have a large applicability, that you use it out of the box, and that you work with your IT team to make sure it's going to be sustainably managed and not a bigger problem 3 years from now than its benefit.
It's almost like you're reading the script, because the next question, it definitely complements it. Like, what are some of the techniques you found effective in convincing the stakeholders like IT and other decision makers who's not convinced in the the value of technology investments, in legal in general?
Yeah, I think the biggest technique I use is the internal capital planning process. So whether our lawyers believe in technology investing or not, we have an annual process for submitting budgets for capital investments. And in order to get budget and be allocated money, you have to go through a business case process. And so the business case process itself, I think, is a very good technique for socializing. And oftentimes we have to go through 2 or 3 efforts of business cases before we get to the final one. And it's not so much did we produce something good enough to be awarded money. It's more of the business case as a tool of socialization to bring sponsors, to bring users into the conversation. And in that conversation, we get to debate and vet out, is this necessary, is it not? What's required to do it? And the problem is, I think most attorneys believe it's necessary. They just think it should be done in 2 hours for $2,000, which blows my mind considering how much time and money they spend doing legal work, but I guess everything else is pretty easy, right? So using that business case drives the socialization so that even if they never agree that it should take 9 months and $4 million to get what they want, they eventually relent to letting it happen.
Perfect. Next question. Have you used benchmarking metrics from external providers? And where have they been effective for your team?
Yeah, so you said metrics. What was the word before metrics?
Benchmarking.
Benchmarking
metrics.
Yeah. So we've been participating in the HBR Law Department survey now for, I think, 16, 17 years. It's one of the longest time participants.
Surveys.
Yeah, and it's great. We use that for high-level benchmarking about our staffing and our spend, and every time we've got a report going to the CEO or we're asking for funding, it's part of what we use. We use a lot of our own internal metrics, being able to benchmark between portfolios and cases. Now that we've started to develop a more sophisticated analytics capability, we've got an in-house data scientist that's well-versed in business objects. We've got several data analysts, and it's not just having one resource, but a team of resource that can really put to work and make your own data useful. And that's kind of the first step before you even get external data, because external data comes in all kinds of forms and packages, and if you don't have a way to compare and contrast it to your data, it won't be very useful. So I believe in kind of starting with our own data, creating our own internal benchmarks, and then taking that out to different industry sources. And right now is the renaissance of data. I mean, if you've built your right infrastructure internally, forget about process consulting, forget about software projects, even forget about outside counsel engagements. You can grab data, share data with your service providers, and do hypothetical modeling and decision making in real time faster than you ever could before. In fact, these days I pretty much don't work with a service provider unless I can give them a raw data dump and they can show me, they can enhance it and give me insights about what I should actually do going forward. So I don't know if you consider that benchmarking or not, but I'm definitely making much more use of sharing our data with external resources that can then analyze and augment it and give us real analytical results back, maybe faster than we can ourselves to make decisions on.
Yeah, like what are some of the biggest opportunities legal departments have currently to improve on their legal analytics?
The biggest things to improve on legal analytics are you got to realize that you got to build like layers of infrastructure before you get to the analytics.
Yes.
And so coming in and expecting you ask a question and the system's got the data and it's going to give you the answer is just wrong, and it's frustrating. And the problem is few people have the vision to see what you need to do for 5 years out to get to that holy ground of having good analytics. So I think I would first exercise a lot of patience and a lot of back to that people and process investment with the idea that if I have a bad process that doesn't have a system, it doesn't matter if I have analytics about it, it's useless. So I need to have a good process with a basic system because then I can get fairly usable analytics. And analytics start with just asking one question and one piece of data, especially with lawyers. I have a mind that's open to all of it and can sometimes bring too much to bear. So I rely on people on my team to help me boil it down and say, just bring them the one piece of data and then let them ask the question that it begs the next two pieces and the next three pieces. And so walking through a narrative storyline is much better than trying to say, what are the 10 and 20 things and how do I put them all up on a dashboard?
What's coming next in the technology landscape? What do you think will be the next big thing?
Oh, what is the next big thing in the technology landscape? I am such not a next big thing guy because I believe all of it deals with people and process, and the people who build software are carpetbaggers that are really benefiting off of your people and process. They just make it look like they solved it with their software. I mean, did Einstein invent the equation E equals mc squared, or did he discover it? You know, did matter management systems invent e-billing, or did they just discover the way to put something around it? So the question is, what's the next big thing in legal business that will then drive some kind of response for a technology to support it? That would be how I'd reframe it. And I think the next big thing in legal business is securitization. I think legal is a proxy for finance. We've been treating it like a mystical art. And as we get more and more process and data, just the same way that long-term capital proved you could make money off of arbitraging treasury bills, we're going to start to find we can arbitrage off of legal risk. And that's the next big business practice that's going to then drive analytics and AI and things to help make it happen or give somebody an edge over somebody else to profit from it happening.
Perfect. And then the final question on this one, Greg. We've been hearing a lot about AI in legal for some time. What are some of the use cases where you think AI will transform legal specifically, or will it? And then what is driving the increased usage in recent years of AI in workflow tools and CLM systems?
I think leave the AI to the spots in the legal workflow that have always been kind of left to the computers and the computer science aspect. I think we're not to a point where AI is going to be making legal decisions yet, although that's certainly going to happen in the future. And so right now, AI is just about finding a needle in a haystack faster and better. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's where I think the main application is going to be, at least for the next, say, 3 to 5 years. As we start moving into more virtual reality-based experiences and recognizing that we no longer need a lawyer, we need a legal linguist, or we need a forensic dispute examiner, then we might see different kinds of technologies with AI and machine learning actually contribute to the processing and maybe some of the decision making, or at least the guidance for the human to make a decision. Why are my attorneys estimating reserves each time? Shouldn't they have a historical lens and guidance as to a range or likely settlement to help create what their value should be? And that's some things that could help improve the accuracy and effectiveness of the humans that are really still the specialists that we depend on today.
That completes the technology force, and we're on to the final force, the dreaded name, COVID-19. I'm going to preface this, like legal operations must be prepared to ensure business continuity, both in times of business as usual and amidst the crisis. A disruption like COVID-19 is an inflection point, one where some companies are learning the hard way the need for automated, streamlined processes, and are finally finding the motivation and momentum to begin implementing them to survive the immediate crisis. While more enterprises are focusing their preparations on the new normal and what the global pandemic will mean for the future. First question, 2020 has been a year of unprecedented change. Can you tell me a little bit about how your company has responded and what has been the biggest challenge to this? And I think you mentioned this earlier, were you prepared for it? And it sounds like you guys were, it was pretty seamless.
Yeah, I think nobody's prepared for it, but especially being a healthcare organization, we were about as prepared as you could be for the kind of impact it would have on our services, our members, our response. And I think we've, elevated our game and really delivered on what we need to do to provide high quality access to affordable healthcare. But, you know, nobody's prepared for this. And these kinds of crises always reveal where the inefficiency and the opportunities are. It doesn't matter what the 2009 crisis did, there was still leftover opportunity for it. And so our company is responding by taking, you know, drastic looks at headcount. Why do we need this person? Are they doing value? Drastic looks at how to innovate and automate with technology, because what we need to reduce those 2 headcount and automate it, or we need to reuse those 2 headcount to something new, so we need to automate it. And then, you know, looking at what we buy outside versus what we do inside. And so that means really across the board, we're using this as a chance to try to change the structural and financial model of a very long-term legacy healthcare organization. I liken it to when I worked at AT&T in 1999, because it was a large monopoly-driven company that had to change because of the 1996 Dereg Act. Well, Kaiser's been going through the same thing because of the 2014 effectiveness of the ACA. And so while the ACA, a lot of people say, made healthcare accessible, it failed at making it affordable. And that's where we needed a little help from our friend, the VID, because nothing like a good healthcare crisis for a healthcare organization to get really tuned up on how it delivers its process and figure out how to get that affordability down. So, you know, we're going through some painful restructuring, but it's not anything like what other companies, IBM, when they had to respond to personal computers, you know, companies in the cable backhoe industry had to respond to hydraulic backhoes. It's the same kind of thing. Kaiser's been having to respond to digital healthcare, to personalized healthcare, and COVID makes us really have to take seriously how to make old and modern healthcare affordable.
Wow, brilliant. How have you like managed your team, like being remote? Was there challenges? Was there challenges with that, or was it more efficient?
It's exactly what it was before, because we all walked into the office, went into our individual cubes, shut the doors, and got on WebExes and Teams. So I don't get to see him passing in the hallway anymore. We never had time to take lunch anyway. And the good news is now there's no excuse to have to be in a conference room and make it from one room to the next. You just got to flip from one Teams call to the next. So no excuse for being late. But, you know, seriously, we do pay some attention to touch points that allow for social interaction. I do probably look more to being in touch individually with my team, or making sure that work that needs to be done as a team, there's a structured kind of agenda or cadence to it. And then just making sure that people have the support they need at home, whether it be desks and chairs. You know, ergonomics are a big thing. When you're working 8 hours a day clicking on the screen, your wrists and your back need to be in good shape. And that's something Kaiser's always prioritized as a healthcare provider, and I try to really watch after for my team as well.
So final question on this one is, what is the biggest change to legal operations that maybe has not fully materialized yet, that you may see coming as part of it, the impacts of COVID?
Oh, yeah. Well, legal operations has gone to a virtual service center model. We accelerated the ITIL model of service desk support for users and design and engineering for solutions. And now we're in a virtual service desk. So, you know, whether we had it in Malaysia or we had it in Nebraska, or we got it in Martinez, California, it doesn't matter as much anymore. So everybody has to be a professional service center supplier, not an old-fashioned manager or secretary. And now with everything being virtual, there's more possibilities about how to realign the work, where to create centers of work, or how to do the work internally or externally. And Colin, as I like to do, I don't want to just see over the horizon 2 or 3 years from now. Let me tell you what the future will be 5+ years from now. And it's going to be giant legal operations center clearinghouses that are shared between enterprises, the same way financial services take their non-strategic risk and offload it to industry clearinghouses. I expect we're going to start to see, why should Sutter and Kaiser and dignity all figure out how to tool up and respond to the same kind of government investigation. Non-strategic, non-competitive between them and the market. Let's offload that to a shared risk entity that is powered by legal ops.
Unbelievable, sir. This was fantastic. That completes our 4 forces impacting the future of legal ops with Greg Kaple from Kaiser Permanente. Greg, you've been a mentor of mine. You've been a friend. This has been unbelievable to just run through the questions with you and get your expert opinion. I want to give a huge shout out.
You're awesome, Colin.
Thanks, brother. I'm working hard on it.
Well, and let me give you a shout out, man, because one of the biggest challenges legal has is transparency. And legal ops has been a big force for solving that, but I can't think of a bigger force than legal operators and Colin McCarthy here for really pulling the curtains back on this and getting the celebrities of this industry out sharing their knowledge and really rising the tide, Colin. I mean, you're a one-man evangelist and advocate, and I'm happy to join your band any day.
You're the man. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. And I appreciate Mitratech for today's partnership and, you know, just kind of running these questions, getting the experts. And as I say, like, you know, a rising tide raises all boats. Take back the blinkers and empower legal operations folks with knowledge from experts like you, Greg. With that, my friend, I'm going to let you get back to your family. And I appreciate it, my friend. And we'll catch up soon.
You're the best, Colin. Have a good one, man.
You too, man.